Good afternoon, everybody, once again. And as folks are shuffling into the meeting room here, it is 1 o'clock, and that means it's time for the 7th of our 8 sessions here for the virtual not-for-profit conference. Appreciate everybody being back with us. Great session ahead of us. Before that, I know you're getting sick of me mentioning these, but our housekeeping items, as always, remember to answer at least 3 of the poll questions. Those are your attendance trackers. You'll need to answer those to make sure you get CPE credit. The short survey gets posted to the chat link at the end of the session. It also should direct you right to SurveyMonkey to complete that survey once we close out of the webinar as well. And finally, just in case you missed it, we will be emailing a link to all the surveys for each session in case you missed one and want to go back. The CPE certificates, of course, are going to be emailed out within 10 days. And there's our email address if you have any issues that you need to contact us with after the seminar. Finally, we're going to record the seminar. We won't distribute the slide deck, but we will distribute the recording. You can go back to the recording on our website. It'll be posted within 7 days, and you can reference the slides and the content there, and you can fast forward, rewind, or go to anywhere you need to see the content. And then finally, during the presentation, I'll monitor the Q&A, and I will ask any questions that might come up to Nita and Bob as we go through this. That's the best place to ask questions. If you just want to chat amongst yourselves, love to see the conversation on the chat pod as well. I will be in there monitoring the conversation and cross-posting any questions that we might get to the Q&A tab. So with that, we will head into our 7th session of the day of the seminar. And really, I have 2 really great folks that I'd like to introduce and tee up. We have Nita Sanger and Bob Mish. Both Nita and Bob are with our Cherry Bekaert Digital Group, and they both specialize in digital transformation services. So these are the experts we want when we're talking about what does digital transformation mean for your nonprofit organization. So Nita, thanks for joining us, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Matthew. Really appreciate it. So what we're going to be talking about is digital transformation and what does it mean for your business. With that, let me just give you a little bit of my background. So as Matthew was kind enough to mention, I'm a director in the digital transformation services and brings significant experience, having done that a number of times at a Big 4 for the audit business, to tax business, risk advisory business, got to do it for a number of other places, including Cherry Bekaert's own business, which was the first thing I did was to help transform our own business. So bring significant experience in this, and I look forward to talking to all of you. Bob.
Hey everyone, I'm Bob Mish. I'm supporting Nita in our digital transformation services group. I began my professional career as a Navy supply officer, and after 6 years of active duty, I began my consulting career, and that was back when there was a Big 8. So some of you may remember the name Coopers and Lybrand, but I was with Coopers and Lybrand, which became PwC, which became IBM, and I joined Cherry Bekaert a little over a year ago. After 15 years with Grant Thornton, and I took over our digital transformation services this past January. So thank you for joining us.
All right, so let's get started. And when we talk about transformation, so what we just wanted to and today we'll be talking about what is digital transformation, how do you actually execute on it? So when we talk about transformation, one of the things to remember is that we are living in what's called a VUCA world. VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And as you know, change has already been happening, but with the recent pandemic that we had, the pace of change has accelerated significantly. And for firms to continue to succeed in this, they're going to need to transform themselves. And so this is what we're sort of going to walk you through as we do today. First, just generally talk about digital transformation, and then sort of give you just some examples of where we've actually done this in the past at different places in different not-for-profits. So with that, this actually brings us to our first polling question. What does digital transformation mean to you? And as we're waiting, the polls are going to stay open for about 60 seconds, and we're starting to get some of the responses. And so we're starting to see some really interesting answers. Um, and I'm very excited to see that most of you actually have got what
Yeah.
the correct thing is. And I think just given that we've got so many of you have sort of responded to, which I think is very exciting for us, we'll just give it a few more seconds before we close the poll. And as we talk about digital transformation, whereas people always tend to sort of say, they kind of tend to equate digital transformation with technology, that is actually not completely accurate. Technology absolutely plays a critical role, but it's basically transforming your entire business. And then leveraging technology and data, but it's sort of integrating digital technology in all parts of the business. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to the next slide, and we're going to have Bob sort of talk a little bit about digital transformation. Am I?
Yeah, so real quick, you can see that 77% of our audience said it's A and B. So, and interesting, some are unsure, which is a big part of why we're doing this.
All right. So now I need to get to the next slide.
Yep.
And are you still able to see the poll on this? Perfect. Bob.
Okay. So why digital transformation? So according to a McKinsey study earlier this year, 8% of companies believe that for them to remain viable, they were going to need to digitalize. And that's a subtlety in that study. It's not digitize, it's digitalize. Digitize is fairly simplistic. It's moving from hard copy to soft copy, but I don't know who does that anymore, and it could be digitized, could even be as simple as a simple automation to a process. But digitalizing is really about transforming the entire business model enabled by IT and technology. So it's not a technology effort, it is a business effort. And what is digital transformation? Well, there's really no single clear answer to what digital transformation is. If you ask 10 different people, you'll probably get 10 different answers of what digital transformation is. But essentially, digital transformation is around business outcomes. What is the organization trying to achieve? Then how can that transformation be enabled by technology? And we'll talk about these areas in upcoming slides, but essentially what we're talking about, does the organization need to understand its customers better, optimize, streamline business operations, enable and engage the workforce, protect the business assets, or innovate for growth?
All right. So first, let's just talk about when a business is trying to transform itself, what are the things that it actually needs to look at? What are the areas of focus? So first, the firm needs to decide how it actually wants to grow. Does it want to grow inorganically, or does it want to grow organically? And what that means is when you're trying to grow organically is basically making your existing business much more efficient, whereas inorganically is growing through acquisitions. So then what you have to think about is, first is, okay, so as you're talking about that, we've always known that there's been an 80-20 rule, that there's a good possibility that that 20% of your clients give you 80% of the revenue. So it makes sense to sort of understand what your addressable client universe. Then for that client universe, you have to determine how do you want to go to market. And just as I mentioned to you, as we talked a little bit earlier about the market shifts that have taken place, especially with the pandemic accelerating the change, historically, it's always been much more of a one-on-one. A lot of our businesses tend to be one person going out trying to sell to someone else. But just as a result of the pandemic, a lot of our selling has moved digital. It's moved online. And at the same time, we've got used to experiences where you need to sort of personalize the experience. So it's no longer like a one size fits all. Here's a product I have that can be sold to everyone. People want to know that you understand their needs. So that's sort of how you go to market. The next piece of this is what products and services you're going to offer. Historically, when we think about products and services, now people have started to think about, okay, what can I do to serve my clients' needs more efficiently? What are the other things that they're going to need? And it could be things like insights, or help them track where something work that they're doing and where it is in terms of in different parts of the process. And last, and certainly not the least, which is actually in some ways very incredibly important, is business operations. When we're talking about business operations, we're talking about looking at the processes that you have, the people that you have, and the technology that you're leveraging. So when we talk about processes where historically everything was done internally, now there's different ways of alternate ways to sort of run your processes. You could first make sure that you automate a bunch of it, or you could put them in delivery centers, or maybe you could outsource to different people. When we're talking about people, that's the other part. And we're in now, these days, we're in a gig economy where you could have some people full time, you could have some people sitting onshore, offshore, full time, part time, and then you could leverage sort of external systems. And then last but certainly not least is the technology that you need to have, which are all the different tools, solutions that you're going to be used to make your operations more efficient. And now what also you have to think about, it's not all the operations are going to sit within your firm. There's a whole technology and business and services ecosystem that sits outside the firm, which has become incredibly important. And I know this is a complex slide, but you really have to think about to bring it down to the smallest level. It's going to be how you go to market, what products and services you offer, and how do you operate as a business. And there's so many different ways to do that. With that, we need to talk about the areas of change.
Areas of change. It starts with people. Everything starts with people, and transformation is about people. If you can progress, Nita.
Yep.
So for us to transform, our workforce needs to be engaged. The organization needs to understand and assess the capabilities of the individuals performing services. And then Nita mentioned the gig economy, alternate models. Interesting factoid is that since the beginning of the pandemic, 4 million US workers have left the workforce. And 21%, in just the last year, 21% of millennials have changed jobs. That has cost over $30 billion in turnover costs. So the people is the first area of change to focus on. Next is process. Understand where you've got bottlenecks, where you've got low value processes, repetitive, meaningless tasks. One of the things that we've heard around the younger generation changing jobs is they don't want to do tasks that they know a machine or a computer can do. They don't want to file. So they move on to work that's going to engage them and really fulfill their professional desires. All of this enabled by technology. It's very difficult to keep up with the pace of technology. And the right answer isn't just to throw technology at an issue or to help your organization. You need to understand how it fits in and how it's and what the outcome is going to be. Perfect example is RPA, robotics process automation. It's a hot topic and everybody wants some. They just don't know why they want it. So the worst thing you could do is automate a broken process. So you need to understand the return on your investment in a technology. And then lastly, tied very closely to the people or the talent, but it encompasses everything, is the culture of the organization. Everybody needs to be part of the transformation. Everybody needs to have some ownership in it. And the mindset needs to really be about innovation.
So this brings us to our second polling question.
So this polling question is kind of like a game of concentration where you flip the cards over and can you remember where the card was? So what are the 4 areas of change in digital transformation? I think people are remembering. Got about 80% in. All right, a couple seconds left. We're up over 90. So we've got people, leadership, technology and office, people, process, technology, culture, leadership, culture, office, and diversity, people, data, and technology, and unsure. All right, we've got just about everybody in. There you can see it's close to 70% had people, process, technology, and culture. All right. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
That's right. So what initiates a digital transformation journey? What are the key drivers for launching a journey? And it really, digital transformation is a journey. So perfect example, and Nita's mentioned a couple of times, perfect example, external conditions, the pandemic. The pandemic has changed everything, and it's a good driver, a good reason to start a digital journey. Next, changing customer needs. I mean, we live in an on-demand world. Our customers want it, and they want it now. So the nature and the demands of our customers have changed. New technologies, I mentioned that earlier, that it's tough to keep up with the pace of technology. There are technologies out there that could help us. Let's look at adopting them. And then, not just changing customer needs, but maybe there are new types of customers. Maybe they're non-traditional customers that are now in the market, and we need to adjust to serve them. And then lastly, the changes in the regulatory environment. I mean, just from the last administration to this administration, you can see the number of regulations that have changed. So in many cases in public sector, not for profit, there are regulations around it. And so may need to adjust the business, transform the business to meet those changes.
All right. So now, how, and I guess a lot of people ask the question, well, how do I know I need to change? In some ways, what we would say is it's like what you will see is you will see symptoms. It's like when you go to a doctor, you know that something's hurting or there's something going on. You may not know what causes it. And that's when, so some of it, and we've sort of broken this up into three broad categories. You'll start seeing some of the signs. Something we could be either seeing flat or declining revenues, or your margins are going down. That's one sign sort of saying, maybe you need to do something differently. The other thing is technologies. There might be new technologies and being used by some other competitors. Or you have systems that are not quite talking to each other, which means there's data sitting in different silos. Or there's some processes and your people are doing the same thing again and again, very like labor intensive manual processes. The data cannot be used because it's so many different multiple systems to provide any kind of insights. And there's no way to sort of streamline it to provide any analysis. And then the other things could be you've been hacked, and that's not a good position to be in. Or there's been different kinds of security issues, or people are facing supply chain issues or talent shortages. So when people are saying, oh, we need to transform our business, not too many people kind of come in and say, hey, we need to transform. They will start seeing certain signs that go like, something's not quite okay. Maybe we need to think about things differently. So then what should you do when you get to that? So what we have done is we at Cherry Bekaert developed what we called a process that you would need to take to approach a digital transformation. And please remember that no digital transformation is same. So what applied to one firm cannot apply to another. But there's a sort of very systematic process of doing this. And we've called it the 5R process. The first one being re-examine. And we've talked already about this a few times, where you're sort of saying something's taken, what's happening in the outside market? Have something changed in the environment? Has something changed with the consumer's needs? And all of us are aware, like when the pandemic, people moved from, say, going to the grocery store to doing something digitally, or just ordering their grocery, which got delivered. Those are the kind of things, what's happening in the market that is causing a shift. The next R would be, okay, so there's something going on outside, but now let's take a look at our own business inside. So that's called reassess, doing an inside out assessment, taking a look at the vision, mission, products and services. And we already talked about this, business operation, talent, skills, and capabilities, to almost say, what do I need to do? So create that digital transformation roadmap. And this is because And it could be if you don't do this, you might be creating products or services. And since most of us are in services business, it could be you could be creating a service that may no longer be as relevant for people because there have been some shifts that have taken place in the market. Then once you've actually said, okay, here's the roadmap, the idea is to actually go re-engineer your business, make those changes that need to be done. And the idea always is don't go around doing something from beginning to the end and then try it out at the end. What we say when we say do transformation, do quick agile processes. Try something, test it out, bring in your clients, co-create solutions with them and say, hey, do you find this useful? If no, give me feedback. What else should I be doing? So almost sort of co-creating the solution and then making edits to it as you move along, so that when you actually have really, you've got to the point where this is a new product or service you're offering, it's been well tried and tested. Then once you've done that, you have to continue to sort of reap the benefits of this. You have to keep on saying, are there ways for new improvements to this? And then so that's sort of it. So it's like, just make sure you keep the processes, but continue to think of ways to that you, so it's called retain. And last but not the least is what we call repeat. We are living in such a world of change that transformation is not a one-time process. It's sort of an iterative process that you're going to need to continue to sort of reassess your business and determine as the market's changing what needs to be done. So with that being said, let's just sort of walk. So what, who's been able to do this successfully and not? And I'm sure you must have heard some of this, and these people have sort of got their names in the annals of history, like Kodak. When the market was changing, they did not adapt. They said, oh no, everybody's still going to want, to get the physical pictures, you create memories and all those things. But if you look at each one of them, what the business that failed to recognize was there were shifts taking place in the external marketplace, and that they needed to transform their business to continue to meet the customer's needs more effectively. So remember, we've talked about this a few times. Customers' needs may have shifted. And in all these cases, that's exactly what happened. The customer had moved and wanted something else, and these firms could not transform their business. Whereas there have been others who've actually been very successfully able to do that. And they have changed the experience. They've customized it. They make sure, and some of these names you might even be surprised, but even a firm like Walmart has created this whole experience where you could do retail very digitally. It's almost creating like, and if you must have heard this in China, where you go into a store, you do not even need to pay anything. They'll do facial recognition, know what you're looking for. You can pick up things and they get charged to your credit card and you can leave. These are the kind of thing that some of these other players have been able to do. So this also tells you that in this world of change, standing still may not be an option, that you're going to need to have to do something differently. That brings us to our next polling question, which is, which of the following is not one of the 5 R's to transform the business? So this should be interesting because they all sound kind of right, but
re-examine, reassess, re-energize, re-engineer, retain.
And then I'm going to say that if we are not able to get you guys to know what it was, then we're the ones who've actually done a bad job, because we haven't been able to get you to remember that. And right now, we've got about 90% of the poll is in, so we'll just give it a few more seconds, and then we'll sort of tell you what the results are of the poll.
I see somebody raise their hand. Is Raina Mosley? You want to type your comment or question in the chat?
All right, so we're going to share the results. And so if this is what I'm going to say when I look at this is, I think we've done a bad job, because retain is actually one of the 5 R's. The 5 R's are re-examine, reassess, re-engineer, retain, and repeat. The one that's not one of the 5 R's is re-energize. And I apologize. That means we haven't been able to actually get that clearly across to you.
Or it was a trick question, Nita, because there are 5 R's in the question.
Yeah.
There was an extra one. So maybe there were 6 R's. Question.
Yep. So, all right. So now let's move to the next.
So interesting diversity in the mix of folks who registered for this webinar. There's quite a few education, several health and human services, non-private, religious organizations. What's in it for you? It's different for every organization. It depends on the objectives and the business outcomes. One of the things that we wanted to make sure we did is give an example of some of these, of where an organization had a challenge based on a variety of those drivers that we discussed. Changing customer needs, something external in the environment has changed. Something drove them to embark on some semblance of a digital transformation. And the interesting thing about the slide that Nita showed earlier about who didn't adapt and who kind of went away and who thrived and through digital transformation. But the key is, it wasn't just about technology. They modified their business model to adapt to a changing environment, to adapt to the changing customer need, that on-demand, want it now, or just a manner in which customers are served. Because before the pandemic, there was a lot of brick and mortar store success that evolved during the pandemic, and a lot more online shopping, as many of you I'm sure know. The adaptation of the business model needs to occur.
All right. So let's sort of talk a little bit about higher education. This is something that I've been very passionate about, and we know there's a number of you on this call who are from that sector. So, and this again brings us back to what's going on in the market. As you well know, the pandemic already created a number of shifts that took place. The first was the fact that there was going to be, because of the fact when the pandemic happened, a number of the colleges had to move the education online. So whereas otherwise it used to be people would have the whole college experience, all the students would be in college, now that had to be done remotely. That's created one sort of external marketplace shift. The second one, which is actually coming, is, and I'm sure all of you are aware of the bipartisan infrastructure bill that got passed in November. And so here's where what the thinking is, how we believe this is going to impact higher education. And I'm sure that a number of you are aware that, the college education in the US is actually some of them is the most expensive in the world. And there's a number of people who come out of it with huge amounts of debt, and it's become increasingly expensive. Now with this infrastructure bill, which is actually going to impact almost every area of where the investment is going to be, there's going to be a need for talent. Talent has become such a big game changer that people are trying to figure out what they need to do. And we're keeping that in mind, where we believe that there might be a lot of opportunities going to be, vocational training schools. So that's going to be, and in terms of vocational training, which has always historically been thought of as being very much blue collar, but now there's going to be, besides, yes, there's going to be need for people who do that. There's also going to be a huge need for people like who understand data and technology and analytics and so, or even things like, AI. So what's going to happen is, and this is already starting to happen, this is going to go up. And I think with the fact that with this bill coming out, this might actually accelerate. So that actually puts a very interesting spin on what this is going to mean for colleges. And when you talk about transformation, you almost never sort of say, okay, where we are today, it's like almost trying to anticipate where you're going to be. So almost trying to say, what would or could the college of the future look like? And so we just wanted to say, well, this is sort of our impression on what we think. We've seen some of the symptoms. Remember, we were mentioning that when you will not know when to transform, but you'll see some symptoms. And some of the colleges, and this is what we've been hearing, are facing some issues. They are starting to see, campuses or colleges are starting to see declining enrollment. The costs are going up. And that the pandemic has actually sort of strained the campus's financials. And at the same time, the needs of the students are changing, who they're looking to make sure where they can, they can get the right job when they come out of there. They want to make sure that, that they are able to, get the most out of the education that's going to help them get the right job when they come out. And obviously they're hoping not to have that much in debt. So with that in mind, we started to paint a picture for you. So I did want you to be aware that this is not a one size fits all, but this is sort of our impression of what we think that the college of the future could look like. So with that, and this is, if you all the things that we've talked in the past, keep that in mind as we talk about this. There's an opportunity for the college to be able to say, hey, maybe all the things that are not essential to, you know, taking care of students, which could be things like tech support, security, finance, accounting, analytics, or maybe, you know, a lot of the other different ed techs that are there would help with different parts of the business. There's an opportunity maybe to send that out, outsource that part of, you know, what's not essential. Then we keep the on-campus support, which is needed, the staff, the marketing, the you know, the office, the library, etc. Keep that on site. You could figure out how to form strategic alliances and think about, remember when I mentioned you, there was a whole ecosystem. This is the same kind of an ecosystem. And I'll just talk a little bit about this. If you get corporations actually form an alliance with the college, they could almost be for them, it benefits them that if talent shortage they have, the college could be the funnel to help them get talent right out of college. At the same time, it benefits the college where they could actually be, you know, making sure that their students get jobs when they come out. This is just one way of thinking about this. The other thing is learning, where historically all colleges would have full-time professors who would be there, maybe some visiting faculty. Now, the way to think about it, there could be opportunities to provide on-the-job training. If you're tied up with the corporations who would say, hey, for the summer, we need people. If your students looking for jobs, then you bring them on the job. Or vocational training. So if we just mentioned about the infrastructure bill, there's an option to sort of say we could provide some of that so our students would get jobs. Or online academy. And your students, which were on campus, and this has already started to happen, could be fully remote or could be hybrid. That could mean if you were only able to have an X number of students, now you might be able to open your college up to 3 times X. So this is something we just wanted to paint for you, that when we talk about digital transformation, it's not just transforming your business to be suitable for today, but for positioning it for long-term growth and success.
I would add one other data point is that another McKinsey study predicts that 14% of the workforce will change jobs in the next year. That doesn't necessarily mean leave their company, but because of digital transformation, the manner in which work is done is going to change. And somebody's job or somebody's tasks may be automated. They're going to need to be prepared to take on a different role.
Thank you. All right. Now this brings us to our next polling question. So and as you heard us articulate what we had to say, just wanted to understand, does your organization well articulated strategy and approach? And have you optimized your operation to take advantage of market opportunities? And just given we're in a very complex and constantly changing world, we realize that this is hard. This is by no stretch of imagination is this easy, and it's also hard you cannot just say, hey, the other college did that, or the other, not-for-profit did that, I will do exactly the same. The reality is no one is starting from the same starting point, and what they're trying to achieve will also be different given on what the firm or what the business's strategy is going to be. So your starting point is not the same, and your end goal or what you're trying to do is not the same as well. And I think even as we look at this, Bob, I think it's kind of interesting. And we've got about 90% of the votes. So if that's okay, I'm going to end the polls and share the results, this is hard. Trying to transform a business is not easy. And you can see that there's like less than 20% have said, yep, we got this under control. But everybody else is saying they know there's things to be done or just not sure what needs to be done.
And this answer we've often seen doesn't necessarily reflect directly on the organization not having a strategy. It speaks more to the internal communications within the organization, because sometimes a strategy could be very well laid out and it's not very well communicated.
Yeah. So we just wanted to talk about a few, and so now we'll talk about what we've done with different not-for-profits. So we'll walk you through one of the ones that I'd actually worked on, which is an association that was serving the legal community. And it was a legal tech association. And they were starting to sort of and this is also talking about what was going on in the market. So as you know, we've had a pandemic for the last couple of years, and the biggest was revenue generator was this annual event that they would have. And as you can well imagine, they were not able to get the number of people that they would have hoped to get into a conference room, because people even this year were not very comfortable going for that, leave alone last year. And then if you move a conference that was meant to be 4 or 5 days, everybody being in the same place, and to moving it digitally, people are not even willing to pay the same price. So the organization started to realize that their revenues were declining. They felt a need that they needed to diversify their revenue base. And then this industry sector is incredibly hot. There's been like $1.5 billion of private equity investment have gone into the legal space, because people are realizing that's an industry that's not changed. And so many of the members of the association were actually some of those that were firms that were law firms and businesses who were facing sort of a lot of pressure. So they were facing, and they needed to figure out how to become much more efficient. And so there was also a need to sort of say, you know, how do we actually go about doing this and transform our businesses? So we were brought in to actually help them figure out what they needed to do to sort of, you know, meet the changing needs of their customers and diversify their revenue stream. So this was just one example that shows you where they sat in the whole legal services ecosystem and what was the unique strength that they brought. They were the one place that was connected to all the players in the industry. This put them in such a unique position. So what we recommended to them was to say, okay, if there's so much money going into this space and private equity is trying to invest, they might not understand. You could create an investment hub that would connect demand and supply, which means connect private equity looking to invest in legal techs with the legal techs that you're already aware of, with the group that actually is, you know, the buyers of services, which is law firms and corporate legal departments. That was one rationale. We said, okay, create an investment hub. The other thing is to help transform the business and figure out what they needed to do. They would need non-lawyers to help them out. So we said, create a talent marketplace. And then last but certainly not the least was the thinking was to create what we called an innovation marketplace, which means you could create a platform which brought in a whole bunch of technologies that would be useful to this industry. So when we made this suggestion to them, and they are actually have moved forward on this. So remember when we mentioned and this is a classic case of the outside market was changing. They were facing declining revenues. You were seeing the symptoms that were there. And now what they needed to do was to think about what can be done, which would take advantage of their unique position to position them for long-term growth and to better meet the changing needs of their customers, which is why this recommendation was made. So in some ways, this is the start of a digital transformation. And so when we start out, we almost have to say, here's what you should be doing, and then help figure out what needs to be done to execute on it. So with that, we'll talk about our next case study. Bob?
Yes, our next case study. And you'll see some themes common in the next two case studies, and it's really around responsiveness to stakeholders and customers. So a healthcare district was having difficulty keeping up with its stakeholders' demand for, if not real time, at least on-time transparency. A lot of that had to do with the inability to access data, the data that they wanted, the data that their customers wanted. So they had old technology. Their enterprise resource planning system, ERP, was over 20 years old. They were buried in spreadsheets. Every process was manual. They couldn't really get to the type of reporting that they wanted and that their customers wanted. Because of the manual processes, the consolidation of spreadsheets, they had little time to really do higher value analysis around what the data was telling them. And they didn't trust the data that was coming out of the system. It was old, it was manipulated, it was in multiple locations. So what they did, go ahead, Nina. Sorry. So they chose a new ERP, but they wanted to make sure that they were ready to implement it. They wanted to make sure that they were ready to go live. So what they asked for was an understanding, was the technology, was the technical environment correct? Was it set up correctly? And was the governance in place? Were they going to be able to extract the data that they needed? Were they going to be able to actually migrate and then integrate other solutions and other systems with it? And how is it configured? Most importantly, they wanted to know what was the likelihood that they were going to be able to go live with this on July 1st, which was the beginning of their fiscal year. So the assessment included a degree of likelihood and an understanding of the business risks with them moving forward to implement on July 1st. So they did get a thumbs up on go live, and right now they're progressing forward to a launch on July 1st. So similarly, a religious association, an archdiocese, again, legacy technology, systems not talking to each other. And this one is exactly what the healthcare district was experiencing, is labor intensive, manual, repetitive, low value processes. The data was in multiple systems. And again, it took weeks to collect the data in spreadsheets, consolidate it, and then be able to make something of the data. It was data. It wasn't information to analyze. And plus, with the data being extracted and then residing in different locations, again, the trust of the data, but also their vulnerability for security and privacy violations. So what they had asked for was a plan. They wanted a roadmap. And so we helped them develop a strategic roadmap that was a 3-year plan to help rectify, actually bring them into the 21st century, help them modernize how their technical infrastructure was supporting their business operations. So the 3-year plan had a step scale for them to move to the Microsoft 365 platform, move to the cloud, centralize the data in a central information library, which has gone live. And then the plan or the roadmap has them with separate initiatives over the course of the next 2+ years to actually get to that desired end state of being a cloud-based, fully modernized diocese. All right, Anita, I think we're at our last polling question.
Mm-hmm.
Which tools, technologies, and approaches have you used to digitally transform your business? Technologies for digital marketing to better meet customer needs, analytics to anticipate trends, leveraging alternate talent models, technologies to optimize business processes, or none of the above.
And even as the answers are coming in, Bob, it's kind of interesting to see that. And I think this is one of the things that we've seen quite a bit. People tend to lead with technology and saying, oh, some things we need to change our systems, et cetera.
Yeah.
But often when you're trying to transform, you have to sort of think more broadly, because technology, as we mentioned, is the enabler of change. It's not the driver of change. It's almost sort of saying, what are we trying to achieve? But Bob, would love to hear your thoughts on that.
No, that's right. And when you think about the areas of change that we talked about, the 4 areas of change: people, process, technology, and culture. We mentioned that we lead with talent, we lead with the people. And not surprisingly, when we're talking about digital transformation, that is actually the least common answer here, is the alternate talent models.
And I think when we just say people tend to sort of say, why is it about people? Because remember, you could have the best technology, but the people are the customers who are buying the things, and the people who are also delivering it are also people who are going to be using it to deliver to clients. So that's why people become so incredibly important. Yeah. But this is sort of our last polling question. We've done incredibly good on time.
Yeah, and if you have any questions, please pop them into the chat window, and we'll do our best to answer them in the couple minutes we have left.
I'm not seeing any questions. Matthew, are we ready to?
I think we have answered most of the questions already, but I do have one question for you, and that is, when I look at some of the case studies that you guys brought up, and just when I think of just how big of a task it would seem to digitally transform, can you talk a little bit more about, what is your experience as far as can you start small and take baby steps, especially with not-for-profits who are a little bit more limited on financial resources, on people and talent internally. What can they do to kind of take baby steps as they go through this journey?
Yeah, Nita, I know you have an answer for this, but let me just chime in real quick and
Sure.
comment. You used a phrase, Matthew. It's hard. It is hard. And the easiest thing is attack the low hanging fruit, but then you have the business impact from just knocking out some simple things. But the harder something is, usually the more valuable the end result is. So it's that balance. And especially when you talk about resource constraints, the key is to understand the destination, right? Where do you want this journey to end? And then reverse engineer and back into, all right, what is it going to take to get there? And then time bound it so that you could make the investments as necessary, and then adjust. Nita?
Yeah, and to that, what I would add is like Bob said, it's almost like know where you're trying to go and then do it in bite-sized pieces. Because the first thing, I think the hardest part is first to acknowledge that you need to do something, then kind of say, what do I need to do? Because I think a lot of times that's what people find hard. So which is where we say that's a short process. You could easily within 2 to 4 weeks come in and figure out, okay, what do I need to do? And then create that roadmap and then decide what are the things which are more immediate, which will show results, because you don't want to be throwing a whole bunch of money at it and spending a lot of time. But as you start seeing some of the benefits, then you can sort of take iterative steps. And that's why it needs to be an iterative process. But absolutely, there's so many things that can be done. And all we keep on saying is staying still may not be an option, because so many of our businesses, so many of the and I just mentioned the education sector, but in not-for-profits, I just mentioned to you the organization we were dealing with, their whole market was shifting. And if they didn't do something, their revenues are clearly going down. They needed to do something. So I think that's what you need to sort of say, that standing still may not be an option. Even doing little things which are incremental, you don't have to do the big leap, but that already gets you on the right path.
Yeah. Another question for you, who do you guys typically work with inside organizations to spearhead? Who's owning the project on digital transformation on the client side with you guys? I imagine it's all over the place depending on what you're doing.
Actually, it has to be at the C-suite level. Where it has been most effective has been when the CEO kind of owns it. Because think about this, they are the ones who set the vision for what they want the business to be. And doesn't mean they have to do all the work, but it has to be owned at the CEO, the COO, those. And if you see, even when Cherry Bekaert and I mentioned that was one of our own, we first did our own transformation, it is owned by the CEO. Then she or he can bring in people who will actually tactically be the people who will execute on it. But if that ownership is not at that level, this is never going to be successful. It's not a technology play. It's a C-suite play.
I was just going to say, I mean, yeah, you said C-suite, but it would be beneficial if the CIO did not drive it.
Okay. That's good to know. And then are the timelines always, years to implement, or is there shorter timelines when you break this down?
Thank you, Matthew. I just figured out how to do it typing. So I did answer that. It as Nita mentioned, it can be done in bite-sized chunks. And the timing, the length of it depends on, again, your desired outcome. But in reality, this should be an ongoing culture change.
Mm.
So while a digital transformation initiative has a time boundary on it, a digital transformation journey really is continuous.
Thank you guys so much, Nita and Bob, for your time today. And obviously your contact information in front of folks on the screen if they want to follow up and talk a little bit more. I know most of your days are spent doing just that, talking to people and talking about where they are on their journey and where we could possibly fit in. With that, that ends our 7th session. We've got one more session coming at you this afternoon, and that is going to be on various legislative updates impacting employers. So more on the employer HR side of the house, which will be a good session. That begins at 2:30 p.m. Eastern time. So give you a little break here to refresh and get some caffeine, and then we'll be at our last session of this seminar. So Nita, Bob, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you soon.